Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club Revisited, the show where we take a fresh look at past interviews and revisit the stories that continue to inspire and inform. This week, we're looking back on an interview with Representative Genevieve Mina from Anchorage. In this conversation, she opens up about her family's unique business and how it gave her the tools to navigate the complex, multi-generational world of politics. She also shares how that early experience unexpectedly helped her cope with personal tragedy and childhood drama. And now, Andrew in conversation with Genevieve.
I guess that some of those folks died. Do you remember being young and people dying?
Yeah, very much so. So I was used to having a lot of residents pass away, and I guess in a way, it perhaps gave me a little bit of maturity at an early age, and also a bit of trauma that I had gone through growing up. I mean, my dad died by suicide when I was 11.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Genevieve Mina, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Hello.
So let's get started. You are born and raised in Alaska, correct?
Yes, I am.
And where did you grow up?
So I was born in Airport Heights on Wintergreen and 16th Avenue. And then when I was about 3 or 4-ish, my family bought a home in your district, in the UMed district near 36th Avenue. And they bought that because they were starting their official assisted living home business. So we lived in a split level where we were on the upstairs and they ran the assisted living home on the downstairs. And then we moved back to Airport Heights when I was about 9 or 10 years old. And that was because they built a home in that front yard where I have been living ever since with my family.
When you were 3 or 4, you lived in an assisted living facility, basically.
Upstairs. And so that is how I grew up. I grew up around more elderly individuals than I ever hung out with kids my age. I was very shy, but when you are running an assisted living home, that is a home and community-based setting. And so the focus of those care settings is that you want a client or a resident to feel like this is their home and that they're around other people. And so the value of having a young child or a pet, an animal, or caregivers who understand how important that relationship is invaluable to care for elderly individuals and people with disabilities, et cetera. And, part of our assisted living home is that we primarily took care of people with dementia and Alzheimer's. So that has a lot of challenges if you're a family member or you're a loved one, but that was just the experience. It was normal for me. Yeah.
How many folks at the maximum? How many folks lived in the assisted living part?
For the homes that we were in, so it was a max of 5. At the peak of our family business, they had 3 homes, so ranging from 3 to 5 individuals. And we had family, friends, and other acquaintances working as caregivers in those facilities. And so, it was a lot to manage for my mom and my dad when he was alive. But for those homes, it gave my mom a lot of freedom. I'm really grateful to have a mom that has always been the breadwinner of my family and to have a lot of really powerful women be my mentors and be my role model. My mom was managing all those facilities, and it's a hard business, but we were able to go on vacation. We were able to have a lot of flexibility with our time.
I guess that some of those folks died. Do you remember being young and people dying?
Yeah, very much so. So I was used to having a lot of residents pass away. And I guess in a way, it perhaps gave me a little bit of maturity at an early age, and also a bit of trauma that I had gone through growing up. I mean, my dad died by suicide when I was 11. And so I think all of these different factors created an environment where I enjoyed being around people that come from different backgrounds. I've always loved and thrived in environments where there's a lot of age diversity. And I think it's because that's how I relate to people. And I think there's so much special there's such a special feeling with being able to connect with someone who you might not think might relate to you, that comes from entirely different experiences. But it's so gratifying because that's like the human condition, is to be able to connect with people.
You just mentioned that your dad died by suicide when you were 11.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. Can you talk about did you have a nuclear traditional family prior to that?
Yeah. We did. And so a lot of that got shooken up after my dad had passed away. But, that's a lot of the experience for people in our state, especially young people. There's been so much work over the past couple of years to bring light to adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, and how much that impacts a child's success later on in life. So I had only learned about ACEs a couple of years ago, like 2017 was that when I was interning in the legislature. And I credit, a lot of the work of my predecessor, Guarantar, to pass legislation that talked about trauma-informed policies, in our schools and the way that we as legislators and as our government develops policies. But trauma is so indelible to a child's psyche. And so it was hard for me to ever talk about it for about 10 years. But then after that, I realized that there's so much power in telling my story, because my story, unfortunately, is incredibly relatable to a lot of people. But I think it's important for us to bring those issues to light, because we can't tackle these problems without really talking about how it impacts us.
I want to ask a couple more questions.
Sure.
They're pretty personal, so I acknowledge that. Did you know when you were 11 that he had committed suicide?
Yes.
And you have an older brother?
Mm-hmm.
That's it? There's 2 kids?
Yeah, I have a couple of half-siblings and as well, but I primarily have grown up with my brother.
Were you shocked? Was it completely unexpected? Or looking back, did you see the signs?
Yeah. So at that time, a couple of months before it had all happened, I remember having a conversation with some of my family members where they had brought up, like, hey, your dad is going through some stuff and like he's depressed, but it really just stayed at that. And for, Asian families, Filipino families, it's very uncomfortable and unusual to talk about mental illness and to talk about depression. It is a huge issue in our community where talking about mental illness means that there's something that's wrong with you instead of actually validating those experiences. And so I never asked questions, and I myself felt uncomfortable talking about, thinking about my father as being vulnerable. But that's as far as I knew. So it really did come from a shock, because that's how it happens. It often comes completely out of nowhere.
What's your best memory of your dad?
Ooh, I would say, so he was incredibly friendly and very funny, charismatic, got along with a lot of people. And so I think some of my favorite memories are just thinking about him singing karaoke, which is very typical for a lot of Filipino families. But my family usually would host like a big Christmas gathering, a big Christmas party every year. And so we would have a lot of family friends over, and he just loved to host. He would drink a lot of beers, and then he loved to sing. So he would sing like Frank Sinatra and just a lot of 60s, 70s classic tunes.
And you love karaoke.
I do love karaoke.
I've heard you sing karaoke. You're a very good karaoke singer.
I know. I love it. Since I was a kid, I love karaoke.
Do you think of your dad when you do karaoke?
Yeah, I do. I think of my dad when someone sings My Way, and I go, who? Well, then also, you can look it up on Wikipedia. There's a whole thing with Filipinos singing My Way, but we take it very seriously, is what I'll have to say.
You've brought it up a couple times.
Uh-huh.
You are not the first Filipino legislator.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about history of Filipinos in Alaska? And what your election means?
Yes. Well, let me tell you, Andrew, I pre-filed a bill that was read across the floor a couple of weeks ago. So House Bill 23 is Filipino American History Month and officially recognizing October as Filipino American History Month in state statute. And this bill is to acknowledge the history of Filipino Americans and our contributions to the state of Alaska. It was actually introduced a couple of years ago by Senator L.B. Gray Jackson, and I've been really humbled and honored for her to reach out to me as she was thinking of introducing this legislation again for us to carry it together and for me to introduce it on the House side. So for myself, I am the second Filipino American elected to the Alaska State Legislature. The first was Thelma Buckold, who was elected in the early 70s. And at that time, she was the first woman Filipino American that was elected to any state legislature in the United States. And so that means a lot to me. You know, when I was interning in the legislature, I was curious and I was like, I wonder if there's any Filipinos that had served in the building. And that's how I first learned about Thelma Buckold. But in the years since, what has been so special, especially with the Filipino community that is very close together, depending on where you are in the state, the Filipino Americans that are involved in politics and government are very small and in between. And so when I was interning, another individual that was working in a different office, Christine Marasigan, had known of me, and she's done this with so many other Filipino Americans who have worked in the Capitol. She reached out to me and she really welcomed me to different opportunities for young Filipino Americans and helped me get more involved in the Filipino community the more that I got involved in politics. And so I really credit her and so many other mentors that have helped me be more proud of who I am as a Filipino American in politics, and also just proud of my own identity because I didn't feel that connection growing up. And especially when you have a pressure from your family to, you know, become a nurse or a cardiologist. And, you know, for at least my family, we didn't have anybody who worked in politics. We didn't have anybody who were lawyers. And so even to this day, I still have to defend the work that I do and why I do it and why I love public service. But I think it's so important to have that representation because it helps other Filipinos and then other people break the mold where they feel like they're pressured to be destined for whatever pathway that their upbringing or family tells them to.
I interviewed Dana Stavenel for the D-Anchorage Book Club podcast, the previous version of this podcast, and she grew up in Soldovia. And when I was researching her, the thing that I found so interesting was the very large Filipino community in Soldovia prior to statehood. And I think that something that was just a surprise for me and maybe something that our listeners may not realize is what a large presence of Filipinos there were in Alaska prior to statehood. That this is not, you know, this is not a recent phenomenon. Like, you've been here a long time.
Yes, absolutely. Can you guess what was the earliest recorded presence of Filipinos in the state of Alaska, or the lands now known as Alaska?
I'm guessing it was a long time ago.
1788.
1788.
So it was Spaniards who were on ships and they were exploring, but there were Filipino seamen that were on those ships. So this dates back to when the Philippines was under Spanish colonialism. So Filipinos have had a long presence in the United States and in Alaska. A lot of the history of Filipinos in Alaska goes back to canneries and fish processing plants.
Yeah, that's what they were doing.
Right, exactly. So pretty much any coastal city in Alaska, especially if they do anything with the fishing industry, you most likely will find a lot of Filipinos. And part of that is because of the Chinese Exclusion Act in the late 1800s meant that a lot of Chinese migrant workers that were working in Alaska were essentially replaced by Filipinos. So there is a complicated history there, but in the 1900s, there became a trend of Filipino migrant workers that would work between California farms in the summertime and then fish processing plants and canneries in the wintertime, and they would circulate between California and Alaska. So those individuals have been called Alasqueros. And my dad was an Alasquero in his own way. You know, he originally had moved to California through his family, and he came up to Alaska because of seasonal work. So my dad has been a part of the generations of other Filipinos of how they came to Alaska. Additionally, you have the relationship of the United States and the Philippines with our healthcare workers, particularly nurses. That's how my mom really got to Alaska after marrying my dad. My mom's been working as a nurse for over 35 years. But, our stories are so much more than the Alascaros and the healthcare workers. We've been in local politics. We run small businesses. We're dancers, we're performers, we're writers and artists. And there are so many complexities with the Filipino-American identity. And I think it's so important to highlight how different we are, but that we still can feel Filipino pride, even if we don't see ourselves in the representations of mainstream culture.
And there are also Filipino politicians such as yourself.
Yes.
And you said there wasn't really a model for you and your family.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you end up here?
That's a great question. I think so much of it stems from a curiosity of the world and a desire to do good things and things that make me happy and are fulfilling. And so growing up as a very shy kid, I had never imagined myself ever being involved in politics or running for office. But I also had a yearning to do things that would help improve things that I was insecure about. So for example, because I was shy, I was a big mumbler when I would talk growing up. And in high school, there were opportunities for me to get involved in clubs so I could be around other people and do volunteer work that I was too scared to do by myself, but I could do if I was doing with a group. And I joined the debate team because of a very close friend of mine who encouraged me to do it. And I never wanted to do any of the solo events. I wanted to do the events that I could do with a partner. That really got me out of my shell to do public speaking on a regular basis. And debate really sparked a light in me to venture into other ideas, policies, topics, and interests that shaped the world around me and helped me understand things better. And I think perhaps a lot of that curiosity might come from the fact that I'm the only person in my family that's born here in America. The rest of my family emigrated over. My brother emigrated when he was 5 or 6 years old. And so when you're coming from a very different frame of reference from the rest of your family, as a child of immigrants, you have to do a lot of work to create relationships and have that same frame of reference with people you go to school with versus building new different frame of references for people that you spend time at home with all the time. And so I feel like you do a lot more work to just figure out the world because, and this is such a cliche when you talk to a lot of like children of immigrants, you feel like you are living between two different worlds and cultures and you're trying to bridge between them. And so I think from that, I realized that I just had an excitement to meet people, even though I was so shy and scared of them for so long. And I genuinely love learning about why people think the way that they do and figuring out their reason of being in the world. It's from the debate team that leveraged me to want to attend UAA so I could compete on the Seal of Debate team. And I was trying to force myself to study biology, but really, same friend who got me to debate also got me to volunteer in a local campaign. And that's what changed the trajectory of my life and my career.
What was the first campaign?
Ethan Berkowitz for mayor 2015. And so it was such an interesting time because I got involved in local politics. It wasn't the DNC. It wasn't big presidential races that got me involved. It was a local mayoral race. And, I realized that throughout that campaign, I really enjoyed Anchorage and I really enjoyed Alaska. This is the only place that I've lived in for the entirety of my life besides, a DC internship there. But I love Alaska and I've never had an inclination to want to leave the state. My family, all of my immediate family is here. All of my friends are here. And I've always found a treasure and a wonder in the place that I live in every single day. So I knew that there was something special about this community. And to be able to get involved in politics, local government, and find out who the individuals serving in public office were and the volunteers behind those campaigns really helped me understand that politics was not something that was far away from me. It's a lot of people who truly care a lot about doing really good work and working with each other in very difficult circumstances and knowing that you are held accountable by your constituents, by the state constitution, and by these broader goals and beliefs to move the future of Alaska into a better place. And so that's inspiring just thinking about it. And, to be able to get involved with that just as a volunteer with no background in politics and to be able to continue to build relationships, like that was life-changing for me. So I really do credit how small Alaska politics is, how close our communities are, and the mentorship of so many individuals and the support of my friends along the way that got me to the point where I am now.
Do you speak Tagalog?
Konti lang. I can understand basic Tagalog. I did try to work on a Tagalog language circle with a couple of other friends, some of who are incredibly talented linguists, and other people who had wanted to learn Tagalog. So for many indigenous languages, you'll have language circles. And so we were trying to emulate a similar circle. So it's a lot of people who are learning the language as they're teaching it and having a space to be able to understand a language that's different from a classroom setting and that is a lot more intimate and close with each other.
What language did your parents speak to you when you were little?
English. So that's something that's a little bit different for Filipinos compared to other immigrants who moved to America. I think because of our complicated relationship with colonialism and with the United States, there's a big desire with a lot of Filipinos to be American, to learn English, etc. And so for my family and for many other families, it was a lot easier to assimilate into a new country if they just spoke English and they admired the fact that I knew English really well. But that's a very complex feeling to have where to be able to master a language that your family wants to learn really well, but then also not being able to speak your mother tongue is very alienating. And that was very difficult for me, and it still is, where a unique experience for children of immigrants is not knowing fully what's going on at home because you don't actually understand what people are talking about. And so if there's fights that are going on or if there's really emotional phone calls, you can only understand so much. And then it's difficult to get further than that. And so for myself, one of the things that I'm pretty passionate about, especially serving the role that I'm in now, is that I don't think that there have been a lot of immigrants and children of immigrants who have served in the legislature who understand that perspective. And it's hard to explain to other people because it really comes up in conversation. And that's another reason why I'm proud to represent my district, because it has some of the most diverse neighborhoods and precincts in the United States. And that diversity comes from our indigenous people. It comes from our immigrants. It comes from our refugees. So we're truly are a melting pot of these different experiences that aren't often brought to light.
We're almost out of time. Do you want to recommend a book to our listeners?
Okay, I'll recommend my favorite book. I love Tales of Alaska's Bushrat Governor by Jay Hammond. I love political biographies. I love Alaska history. And this is the creme de la creme of everything that I could hope for in a book. You have someone who is one of the most interesting and most inspiring governors of our time and in Alaska politics, who has come from a very different background from my own. He's well-read, he's an outdoorsy guy, and he somehow found himself in politics. I love his perspective on and his frankness on the state of the Alaska legislature. And there are so many similarities and anecdotes in this book that I can see in our legislature today. He's also very funny and very crass. It's just excellent. I love this book so much. And Jay Hammond, what a guy.
Hey, thank you so much for being on the show today. And we have to go.
We gotta go.
Okay,
Goodbye.
Talk to you guys later. Bye. Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@ahaleg.gov or call 907-269-0123.